In the gentle warmth of a Kentucky spring, the small playground at Harwell Park seemed like the safest place on earth. The trees lining the edge of the lot were newly green, their branches casting shifting shadows over the cracked blacktop. Denise Harris sat on a faded wooden bench watching her 6-year-old daughter Emily run in wide circles around the swing set. The air smelled of damp grass and the faint sweetness of a nearby ice cream truck that chimed lazily in the distance. Denise felt that moment settle on her like a promise that life would always be this simple. But, as any mother who has lost a child will tell you, simplicity is the first casualty of tragedy. Denise tried to focus on the gentle breeze and the sound of children shouting in delight. She adjusted the strap of her purse and glanced at the paperback she had not opened all afternoon. Emily was fearless. Darting up the slide the wrong way, her blonde hair lit like a halo in the sunlight. Denise smiled, thinking about the ice cream cone she had promised her. It would be mint chocolate chip, her daughter's favorite, even though it would drip all over her clothes before they made it to the car. Denise thought about how she would need to scrub the green stains out of Emily's shorts. That ordinary annoyance seemed so comforting then. The late afternoon sun dipped low, painting long streaks of orange over the field. Denise waved at a neighbor who approached with a leash, in hand a big brown dog pulling excitedly at the lead. Denise turned just for a second to greet her. Her voice caught on a polite laugh, some harmless joke traded about the dog's endless energy. The conversation lasted seconds, but when she turned back to the playground, she felt the air leave her lungs. The swings creaked in the breeze. The slide was empty. Emily was nowhere. Denise felt rooted to the bench, her mouth dry as panic rushed through her veins. She called her daughter's name once, twice, her voice rising from curiosity to fear. The other parents looked over, puzzled at first, then concerned as her voice broke. One mother left her own child at the sandbox and jogged over to help. Denise moved through the playground in frantic circles, eyes darting, scanning every patch of grass, every scrap of shade under the climbing frame. She shouted until her voice was ragged, her heart thudding like it would break free of her chest. Within minutes more, people joined the search. A teenager scrambled through the nearby woods, shouting Emily's name. A man lifted trash can lids and peered inside, his face pale. The call to 911 went out shaking in the voice of a father holding his own child tight. Sirens arrived as the sun finally fell behind the trees. Red and blue lights washed over the quiet suburban streets. Police tape soon snaked along the fence line of the park. Denise clutched a stuffed bunny Emily had dropped beside the bench, fingers white from gripping it too hard. She answered the same question over and over, voice hollow. When did you last see her? What was she wearing? Did anyone strange speak to her? Denise tried to think through the buzzing in her head, recalling the pink sneakers with light-up soles, the yellow t-shirt with a cartoon sun. As night fell, officers shone flashlights into bushes behind picnic tables through the nearby woods. A search dog handler arrived, a wiry man with calm authority, holding a black leash in one hand. The dog sniffed the shoe they found abandoned at the edge of the trees. The flashlight beams converged on the undergrowth where the sneaker lay on its side, the Velcro strap undone as if Emily had pulled it off herself. Denise watched numb as they bagged the shoe in plastic, labeling it carefully. She reached out once, but the officer gently shook his head. It was evidence now. Neighbors gathered along the sidewalk, their faces gray in the streetlights. Mothers hugged their children tight. Fathers spoke in clipped voices, promising themselves and each other that this would not happen to them. The media vans came next, spilling bright white light across the grass. A reporter with a perfect hairstyle spoke in calm, practiced tones about the community's heartbreak. Denise turned away, unable to watch. An officer guided her to the back of a cruiser, letting her sit inside away from the crowd. She stared at her trembling hands, listening to the static of the police radio, hearing her daughter's name repeated over and over, each mention like a physical blow. The police chief addressed the cameras at 10 p.m., his voice heavy. They were treating the case as a suspected abduction. The words fell over the crowd like cold rain. Volunteers were urged to stay safe to let professionals continue the search overnight. Denise heard nothing after that. She would not sleep for the next 48 hours. In the darkness of the park, flashlights still bobbed like will-o'-the-wisps searching for a child who had vanished between one breath and the next. And the whole city of Louisville shuddered as parents locked doors and held their children close, the word missing rattling in every mind. The early morning brought a grim determination that settled over the park like a thick fog. Police cars lined the cracked asphalt parking lot. Officers in dark uniforms moved in tight knots, exchanging clipped instructions as search teams gathered. Denise sat on the edge of an ambulance, a blanket over her shoulders, though the night had not been cold. Her hair was disheveled, and her eyes were red empty, staring straight ahead as paramedics tried to offer her coffee. The park that had once been alive with children's laughter was now sectioned by yellow tape buzzing with radios and the low murmur of worried volunteers. A map was taped to the hood of a squad car marked with red circles and arrows, as officers pointed and assigned sectors for searching. Beyond the manicured grass, the woods that bordered Harwell Park were tangled and damp from the morning dew. Volunteers moved in lines calling Emily's name until it felt like a chant no one wanted to repeat. Leaves crunched underfoot as they parted branches and checked every hollow, every fallen log that might conceal a small shape. Denise refused to stay at the command post. She stumbled along the tree line, her voice hoarse from shouting, until an officer gently but firmly redirected her back. She watched as men in reflective vests and women in old sneakers trudged past, many of them neighbors she barely knew but who called her by name now, promising they would find her little girl. Helicopters thumped overhead in steady loops, their searchlights sweeping the treetops as morning brightened into an unseasonably warm afternoon. Dogs barked sharply handlers, giving them commands as they sniffed clothing from Emily's laundry hamper, items delivered from the Harris home in a brown paper bag. News vans multiplied on the street, reporters standing stiffly in front of cameras with serious faces. They spoke of community horror and a town coming together, all the while framing Denise in the background, clutching the stuffed bunny so tightly the fabric split at the seam. She ignored them completely, listening only to the chatter on the police radios, straining to hear anything that sounded like hope. As the day wore on, rumors spread among the volunteers. Someone had seen a suspicious van near the park entrance. A neighbor boy claimed Emily had talked to a man in a baseball cap near the swings. Police scribbled down every word but found nothing solid. Officers canvassed the nearby streets, knocking on doors, asking if anyone had cameras or remembered an unfamiliar vehicle. A gas station manager produced grainy footage of a pale van speeding past around the time of the disappearance, but the plate was unreadable, and no one recognized the model for certain. Denise sat through every update from the police, nodding without hearing them replaying the moment she turned away on that bench over and over until her mind felt bruised. By nightfall, the search was larger and yet more desperate. High school students joined after classes ended, arriving in clusters with flashlights and backpacks of bottled water. Fathers in work boots left job sites to walk the woods in silence. Mothers organized snack tables near the parking lot, faces drawn tight with worry, offering coffee to strangers. Police officers looked exhausted, their uniforms streaked with dirt, but they pressed on the radios, crackling with calls to check drainage ditches to follow up on calls about abandoned shacks in the woods. Denise overheard them discuss divers preparing to search a pond a quarter-mile away, and she felt her stomach turn to ice. She pressed the bunny to her mouth to muffle the sound when she began to sob. As the second night fell, Denise's house stood dark and empty. Crime scene tape had been strung across the front door, though the word crime felt too blunt for the nightmare they were living. Officers methodically searched Emily's room for clues, brushing for fingerprints on the window, examining toys scattered across the rug. Her tiny shoes were lined up neatly in the closet pairs she would never outgrow. Mark arrived from work in Ohio, eyes bloodshot and shoulders shaking. He hugged Denise in silence, and neither of them spoke much as detectives questioned them separately. The tension between them was immediate old hurts bubbling up in front of strangers, with notepads each trying to prove their innocence through exhausted tears. In the days that followed, the official search began to shrink. Volunteers had jobs to return to and children to care for. Police scaled back the command post, but they kept a smaller team on call following leads that arrived in dribs and drabs. A psychic called with a vision of Emily near water. Someone mailed a letter claiming she had been taken to Florida. A prisoner wrote offering to trade information for a reduced sentence, though he knew nothing in the end. Denise tried to stay involved in every meeting, but found herself drowning in bureaucracy. She watched officers write notes she could not read, watch their tired eyes avoid hers. The reporters stayed pressing microphones into her face, but they were more interested in her tears than her daughter. Detectives were honest about their frustration. There was no sign of a struggle beyond the abandoned shoe. No confirmed sighting of Emily after the park. No witnesses willing to swear they had seen her get into a car. The security camera footage was too poor to identify anyone. The woods had been searched so many times the grass was trampled flat. Police could not say she was dead. They could not say she was alive. They could only say she was missing. Denise sat at her kitchen table, staring at stacks of flyers at the blank space where Emily's photo had been taped to the refrigerator. She picked at the corners of the tape for hours until they peeled away in curls. In the end, the search that had felt like the entire world grinding to a halt simply ended. The last police car drove away. The neighbors took down the posters. The volunteers returned to their lives, offering shy apologies and averted eyes when they passed her in the grocery store. Denise sat on the couch at night, the TV flickering soundlessly in front of her, holding the stuffed bunny to her chest until she fell asleep in exhaustion. The house smelled stale from unwashed laundry stacks of old mail gathering on the counter. She watched the door for Emily every day, hoping for a knock that never came, hoping for a voice to call for her mommy one more time. Winter pressed against the Harris home with silent judgment, the chill seeping into the walls as if determined to drive them out. Denise sat at the kitchen table under the weak glow of a single bulb, stacks of newspaper clippings spreading like wings across the faded surface. Each headline screamed the same horror in different words, her daughter's name printed in fonts that grew smaller as the months passed. She had stopped eating meals at the table. Plates with crusted edges sat in the sink waiting for her attention, but she had none left to give. The calls from friends dwindled, their words of comfort, exhausted, replaced by awkward silences and mumbled goodbyes. Denise knew they pitied her. She hated them for it, and hated herself more for needing them. In the corner of the living room, a small lamp cast long shadows over Emily's toys untouched and collecting dust. Denise would sit in the dark sometimes and listen to the house creak and settle, imagining that one of the sounds might be Emily coming home. The stuffed bunny sat on the couch like a silent witness, its stitched smile faded. Denise sometimes picked it up and pressed her face into the worn fabric until her tears soaked through. She tried to remember the last time Emily had laughed. The sound felt so distant it was almost a lie she told herself to keep breathing. The TV played reruns on low volume, more for company than entertainment, its shifting colors the only movement in the room. Mark came on weekends at first, driving from Ohio with tense determination. They sat across from each other in the living room and spoke in clipped phrases about bills and police reports. Neither mentioned the way they flinched at the sight of Emily's room door still closed, the nameplate she decorated herself, peeling at the corners. Mark would stay overnight on the couch, staring at the ceiling in the dark, listening to Denise cry in the next room. Eventually, he stopped staying at all. He would arrive in the morning and leave by dusk, their arguments growing sharper until they fell silent, both realizing there was nothing left to say that would not draw blood. The police visits slowed until they stopped altogether. Detectives, who once sat at their kitchen table with notebooks and questions, no longer returned their calls. Denise kept their business cards in a drawer she opened and closed so many times the handle loosened. She left voicemails that went unreturned, pleading for updates she knew they did not have. She learned to hate the words "cold case" whispered in town, spoken by neighbors who turned away when she passed. Reporters who once filled her front yard with camera lights and sympathetic faces disappeared to chase newer tragedies' fresher heartbreak. Denise sometimes watched the local news in silence, noting the absence of Emily's name with bitter clarity. One afternoon, Denise opened a letter from the county, a polite form declaring the case inactive. The language was careful, bureaucratic, avoiding blame but offering no hope. She folded it once, twice again until it was small enough to disappear into her pocket. She pressed her hand against it, through the fabric, feeling its sharp corners dig into her leg as she sat and stared at the wall. Later, she tucked it into a box in the closet, where she had begun to store the flyers, the missing posters with Emily's gap-toothed grin, the newspaper articles yellowed with time. She could not bear to throw them away, but she also could not look at them without breaking. The house fell into neglect, dishes piling in the sink, laundry souring in baskets. Denise stopped answering the door. Friends knocked less and less often, their visits cautious and short, leaving behind casseroles she would never eat. She learned to avoid certain aisles in the grocery store, the ones with children's snacks and school supplies, unable to bear the sight of bright plastic packaging, promising happiness to families that still had their children. She walked with her head down, gripping her cart so tightly her knuckles whitened, afraid of the small talk that might lead to the question she dreaded most. "How are you?" The words felt like a taunt. Mark filed for divorce just over 2 years after Emily vanished. The papers arrived in an envelope she set on the counter for a week before opening. She read them at the table in silence, fingers tracing the lines of legal language that felt like a confession of failure. And they did not fight over the house. He did not want it. Denise signed where indicated and mailed them back without a word. When the final decree arrived, she placed it in the same box with Emily's things. She sat for hours afterward, fingers laced around a coffee cup gone cold, staring at the small print of her name, changed back to the one she had before Mark. She wondered if this was who she had been meant to be all along. Nights were the worst. She would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep without the sound of Emily's breathing from the next room. The silence pressed against her like weight, making it hard to inhale. She kept the hallway light on out of habit. The soft glow under the bedroom door meant to comfort a child who was no longer there. Denise would close her eyes and see the park in her mind, the bench where she sat the moment she turned away. She tried to remember every second before that, as if changing them in her memory might change what happened. She whispered apologies into the dark, promising she would never look away again if given the chance. She marked the passing years not by holidays or seasons but by anniversaries of that day. Each September she spent alone sitting at the edge of Emily's bed, pressing the stuffed bunny to her chest. She spoke out loud, telling Emily about the weather, the neighbors, anything to fill the silence. She talked about what first grade would have been like, then second, then third. She could picture the drawings that would have cluttered the fridge, the school photos she would have insisted on framing. Denise let herself believe for a few minutes at a time that Emily was only in another room, sleeping or reading, ready to come running when she called. The house felt even emptier after Mark left for good. His boxes gone from the hall closet, and the dents from his boots in the mat slowly fading. Denise sat in the quiet, listening for sounds that would never return, the muffled laughter of Emily that used to drift from her room in early mornings. She found herself avoiding that side of the house entirely. Dust gathered on the doorframe she had once measured Emily against, pencil lines marking each birthday in crooked rows. Now she could not bring herself to look at them without feeling a pain so sharp it made her dizzy. The sound of her own breath seemed intrusive, so she learned to hold it, exhaling only when the ache forced her to. In town, people began to treat her like a ghost. Clerks at the grocery store spoke carefully around her, their voices hushed as they scanned her small purchases. Friends she had known for years crossed aisles to avoid awkward conversations they no longer had the words to navigate. She understood their discomfort. Even she could barely stand her own presence. She would watch the playground from the car, sometimes engine running, the happy shouts of other children muffled by the closed windows. Her fingers dug into the steering wheel as she counted how long she could stay before the tears blurred her vision and forced her to leave. Mark called less and less. At first, there were still brief exchanges, clipped but polite, about the legal process and splitting the finances. They became sparse, then vanished altogether. Denise learned of his new apartment from a mutual friend who mentioned it in passing before realizing their mistake and falling silent. She felt the rejection like a slap, even though she knew there was no longer any reason to stay connected. He had taken his grief elsewhere, found a new silence to keep him company. She hated him for that freedom, the option to move on that she no longer believed existed for her. Her mother suggested therapy during one of their strained phone calls, the conversation punctuated by long pauses that seemed to stretch for days. Denise listened without responding as her mother offered names of counselors, softly insisting it might help. Denise pictured herself in a bland office, tissues on the table, recounting every mistake she had made. She imagined the pity in the counselor's eyes, the polite nods and gentle suggestions she could not bear to hear. She ended the call early and unplugged the phone for the night, curling up on the couch under a thin blanket that no longer seemed to warm her. Bills, piled on the counter in dull-colored envelopes, she ignored. She had stopped working at the daycare 6 months after Emily vanished, unable to face the sound of small voices calling for their mothers. She had tried other jobs, cashier work and stocking shelves, but every shift felt like suffocation. She would glance at families shopping together and feel her vision tunnel the weight in her chest, making it hard to breathe. After too many missed shifts and too many apologies, she did not mean she stopped trying. The unemployment checks covered just enough to keep the lights on and the heat from turning off completely. Nights were long and cruel. Denise sat by the window watching the street lamps cast their pale circles on empty sidewalks. She remembered nights before when Emily would drag her blanket to the couch and insist on staying up late to watch cartoons. The glow of the TV would flicker over her daughter's sleepy smile as she fought to keep her eyes open. Denise would carry her to bed eventually, the small weight of her body against her shoulder, the most comforting burden she had ever known. Now she pressed her hand to the cold glass of the window, willing the past to replay outside for just a moment, long enough to pretend. One evening, Denise received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single newspaper clipping about another missing child, states away. Scrawled in messy pen were the words, "She will never be found." Denise dropped the letter onto the floor and pressed her back to the wall, sliding down until she sat on the linoleum. She stayed there for hours, knees pulled to her chest, the paper a few feet away like something toxic she dared not touch. She did not call the police. She did not tell anyone. She simply picked it up with trembling fingers the next day, folded it carefully, and tucked it into the box with the rest of the case files, sealing it away like a wound that would not close. Occasionally, Denise would hear about other missing children on the news. She would sit forward on the couch, fingers twisted in the blanket, listening for details. She felt a hollow relief when it was not Emily, a fresh wave of shame washing over her. Sometimes they were found alive, and she would cry for hours at the mercy she had been denied. Sometimes they were not found at all, the broadcast ending with a photo and a hotline number before cutting to commercials for laundry detergent and car sales. She watched every second, memorizing faces and dates she would never need to know. Emily's room remained untouched. Denise could not bring herself to clear it, not even the small socks in the drawer or the lined paper with her early handwriting, crooked letters scrawled in bright crayon. When she forced herself to enter, she stood just inside the door, eyes roving over the small bed with its faded comforter. She would whisper an apology before backing out, pulling the door shut slowly, as if afraid to wake someone. Neighbors suggested she move, saying gently that a fresh start might help. She smiled at them tightly and said nothing, knowing she could never leave the place Emily might someday return to. Wars settled heavily over the case files stored in the police archives, dust layering them like a quiet accusation. Detective Monica Lewis sat in the narrow records room boxes stacked on metal shelves that rattled when she pulled one free. The air smelled of old paper and industrial cleaner. She spread the files across the table, the photographs staring back at her with frozen, pleading expressions. Emily's face was among them, a bright smile with a missing front tooth that felt like a lie now. Monica rubbed her temples, reading the same words over and over: cold case, inactive, no further leads. She refused to close the file, as others had determined that someone had to care enough to see what was missed. Monica was not new to tragedy. She had spent over a decade in the department witnessing the worst people could do to one another. Yet the Harris case clung to her, a puzzle that haunted her at night. She remembered seeing Emily's missing posters taped to telephone poles when she was a teenager herself. Now she sat in uniform badge on her chest, responsible for giving that bright-eyed girl the dignity of being seen. Monica moved methodically through the paperwork, cross-referencing names and dates, looking for the places where the investigation had drifted off into silence. She found notes about the blurry van spotted leaving the area the day Emily disappeared. The vehicle's description was vague, the make and model inconsistently recorded in different reports. Witnesses contradicted each other about the color, some calling it light gray, others white, some insisting it had no windows, while others described a panel van. Monica read the transcripts, imagining the interviews taking place in fluorescent-lit rooms, the witnesses nervous or defensive, their memories reshaped by fear and rumor. The detective who wrote the report had eventually marked the lead as exhausted, unable to tie the van to any local owner. Monica was not satisfied with that answer. She also found the statement from the teenage boy who claimed to have seen Emily with a man wearing a baseball cap. His testimony was discounted after his father made him retract. It worried about the police focusing on their family. Monica frowned at the old handwritten confession, the boy's looping, uneven letters. She wondered what fear drove a father to silence his son about something so important. She picked up the phone and called the now-grown man, who answered with wary confusion. Monica listened as he haltingly repeated what he remembered. He had never really forgotten. He still dreamed of Emily, of her small hand in a stranger's grasp. The investigation had been flawed from the start, stretched too thin by public hysteria, and the overwhelming need to provide answers immediately. Monica saw it in every rushed interview, every unverified tip that went cold, because officers were too busy chasing another. She found notes about an anonymous call to the police tip line that claimed to know where Emily had been taken. The call was never returned. The paper was stuffed in the wrong file, buried among irrelevant reports. Monica felt a cold anger settle in her chest as she realized no one had bothered to follow up. She jotted the number on her pad, determined to trace it even if years had passed. She requested access to old security footage that had once been written off as unusable. Technology had improved, and the department now had software to enhance grainy images. Monica sat with the technician in a darkened room, the glow of the monitor highlighting their tense faces. They watched, frame by frame, as the pale van rolled past the gas station camera. The software sharpened the plate just enough to catch 3 distinct characters, more than enough to narrow it down with DMV records. She felt her pulse race as the technician muttered under his breath, cross-referencing databases' names popping onto the screen. One of them was local, a retired teacher who had passed away years before. Monica stood outside the old man's house the next day, weeds growing high around the porch. She knocked out of habit, but no one answered. The property had sold in an estate sale, the new owners unaware of its history. She spoke to them kindly, explaining she needed access. Inside, she found signs of a life long since emptied. She opened closets and cabinets, carefully, eyes catching on forgotten boxes, old receipts, and a child's hair clip tucked among dusty trinkets. It was pink, faded with age, but unmistakably the kind sold in bulk at corner stores. Monica bagged it carefully, fingers shaking just slightly. She imagined Emily brushing back her hair with it on the morning she vanished. She met with Denise a week later, the meeting arranged through the department with polite formality. Denise looked older than Monica expected, the grief carved so deeply into her features it seemed part of her bone structure. They sat in the station's small conference room, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Monica explained what she had found, the old lead gone cold, not because it was false, but because no one had pursued it far enough. Denise listened without much expression, Eyes distant, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She did not cry. She only nodded, asking in a low voice what came next. Monica promised her there would be more. Denise left the station and sat in her car for nearly an hour before driving home. She kept her hands on the wheel, staring out the windshield at nothing. The idea that someone remembered Emily, that someone still cared enough to look, pulled something loose in her chest. It was not hope exactly. Hope was too dangerous, too painful to invite back in. But it was something close. At home, she opened the box in the closet and removed the folded flyers, the photographs of Emily's face she had hidden away. She spread them across the kitchen table, pressing their edges flat with trembling hands, whispering words she had not said in years. Monica returned to the evidence room, a new determination in her movements. She requested old interview transcripts, phone logs, anything that might hold another forgotten lead. She read them carefully, a highlighter in hand marking patterns and contradictions. She asked other officers to help her cross-check names, people who lived near the park at the time but had never been properly interviewed. She ordered forensic tests on the hair clip, hoping for DNA even degraded after so many years. She called analysts to re-examine the old van footage with the partial plate, determined to find records of where it might have been registered or sold. Denise sat frozen in the attic for nearly an hour before she managed to stand, her legs stiff and unsteady, as if she had aged decades in those few moments. She held the journal pressed to her chest, fingers leaving smudges on the faded cover. The air felt heavier than before, every breath a conscious effort. She climbed down the attic stairs, carefully afraid she would drop the book or fall if she let her mind wander. When she reached the bottom, she closed the attic door behind her with deliberate slowness, leaning against it for a moment to collect herself. The house was silent except for the ticking of a clock in the living room. It seemed almost disrespectful that time had continued moving all these years while Emily's life had ended somewhere unknown. She moved to the kitchen table and sat heavily, laying the journal in front of her as if it might run away. The words stared back at her in crooked lines. Things I cannot tell. The man with candy. He knows my secret. Do not tell Mommy. Denise touched the letters with the tip of one shaking finger, feeling the indentations in the cheap paper. She could see Emily writing them, tongue peeking out in concentration, wanting to be understood but too afraid to say it aloud. Denise's tears dripped onto the page, darkening the ink. She wiped them away clumsily, not wanting to smudge her daughter's last attempt to be heard. After a long while, she picked up the phone with the journal still open in front of her. She called Monica Lewis directly, her voice shaking so badly she could barely form words. Monica answered quickly, and for once there was no polite introduction or professional distance. The detective's voice changed when she heard the raw edge in Denise's tone, shifting from formal to personal in a heartbeat. Denise explained what she had found, repeating the words from the journal in a strangled whisper. She heard Monica's breath catch on the other end of the line. There was no questioning in her tone, no doubt, only a quiet promise that she would come right away. When Monica arrived, she took a seat at the table opposite Denise, her notebook unopened, her pen untouched. Instead, she just listened as Denise pushed the journal across the table with trembling hands. Monica picked it up carefully, as if afraid to damage it, reading the words over and over. She asked Denise if Emily had ever said anything about someone giving her candy, if there was anyone who paid her unusual attention. Denise pressed her palms to her eyes, trying to think. She remembered so many faces at the park, so many neighbors and parents she barely knew. There had always been someone on the bench next to her, someone smiling and commenting on how big Emily was getting. Monica asked permission to take the journal with her. Denise nodded without hesitation, feeling both relief and fear at letting it go. The detective promised it would be handled like evidence, photographed and preserved. She explained how handwriting specialists might be able to confirm Emily's age when she wrote it. They might even find fingerprints if they were lucky. Denise listened numbly, absorbing every detail with the hollow detachment of someone who had lost the luxury of hope. She watched Monica slip the journal into an evidence bag, sealing it shut with a practiced motion. It felt like a final farewell to the last thing Emily had written. In the days that followed, Denise barely slept. She sat up in the living room at all hours, lights burning brightly in every room, as if she were daring the darkness to try anything else. She drank cup after cup of cold coffee, unable to swallow the first sip before pouring another. She waited for Monica's calls with an anxiousness that bordered on physical pain. When the phone rang, she would snatch it up before it finished vibrating, breath-held heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. Each time, Monica's voice was calm but urgent, explaining what steps were being taken, who she was talking to, what she was finding buried in old reports. Monica spent late nights at her desk in the station journal pages spread out under a bright lamp. She had the crime lab photograph every page in high resolution. She spoke with the child psychologist about the wording, trying to understand the significance of the phrasing. The psychologist explained how children often believed threats made to them, how they could be convinced to keep secrets in a way adults might dismiss. Monica found herself gripping her pen so hard it bent slightly. She reread the line, "He knows my secret," and tried to imagine the fear in Emily's voice if she had tried to explain it. She felt anger pool in her stomach, a hot, steady flame she refused to let go out. She called in other detectives who had worked the case years ago, placing the journal on the table in front of them without preamble. Some looked away uncomfortably. Others tried to offer excuses about the workload at the time, the media pressure, the lack of leads. Monica did not argue. She only asked why no one had ever searched the attic thoroughly, why no one had ever asked Denise if Emily kept a diary. The silence that followed was thick and ugly, filling the room with the shared knowledge of collective failure. Monica let it sit there unspoken but undeniable. She made it clear they would not make the same mistakes again. Denise sat at home with the TV off the silence, pressing in so hard she sometimes spoke aloud just to hear another voice. She talked to Emily as if she were there, telling her about Monica, about the journal, about the detective who refused to give up. She apologized over and over for not seeing the signs, for not knowing her daughter had been afraid. She pressed her forehead to the table, eyes closed, imagining Emily's small hand resting on hers. She stayed like that for hours, unwilling to move, unwilling to stop remembering. Monica stood at the edge of Harwell Park in the early morning light, the grass still damp with dew that soaked through her sensible shoes. She looked out over the playground that had been repainted in cheerful colors years after Emily disappeared, the plastic slides gleaming red and yellow against the pale sky. Swings creaked gently in the breeze, empty, moving as if someone had just jumped off moments before. Monica held the evidence bag containing high-resolution photos of Emily's journal pages in her left hand, the clear plastic crinkling softly when she adjusted her grip. She felt the weight of every word written there, a promise she would not let fade. Denise had insisted on coming despite Monica's reservations. She stood a few feet behind the detective, arms wrapped tightly around her waist as if holding herself together. Her eyes moved across the park without settling anywhere, refusing to focus on the benches, the small gate that squeaked on its hinges. The last time she had truly seen this place was that afternoon so many years ago, the sun high, her daughter running ahead with careless joy. Denise swallowed hard, feeling bile rise in her throat. She forced herself not to look away. She told Monica she needed to see it for herself, every inch of the ground they might have missed. They walked the perimeter slowly, Monica speaking quietly into a recorder, noting landmarks, distances, any changes to the landscape. She asked Denise to stop her when something looked different or wrong. Denise pointed to a section of overgrown bushes that had not been there when Emily played here. The city had let them spread, blocking sight lines from the street. Monica made a note to ask for city maintenance records. They moved to the old path behind the swings, now partially repaved, but still cracked weeds pushing through the gaps. Denise paused there for a long time, her breath hitching audibly. Monica put a gentle hand on her shoulder but did not rush her. They examined the wooded area behind the playground where volunteers had once combed the underbrush in wide lines, calling Emily's name until their voices went hoarse. Now the trees were thicker young saplings, grown taller, dead branches littering the ground. Monica's eyes scanned for anything unnatural, any old disturbance in the earth that might mark a forgotten hiding place. She paused at a low cement slab someone had poured long after the disappearance, maybe for a bench that had never been installed. She crouched, running a gloved hand along the edge looking for signs it had been moved or tampered with. Denise stood back, arms crossed tightly, unwilling to come closer, but unwilling to leave. Monica's phone buzzed with a call from the forensic lab. She answered curtly, nodding as she listened. The technician confirmed no usable fingerprints had been recovered from the journal, the pages too worn from years of handling. But they had lifted partial prints on the hair clip recovered from the retired teacher's house, a child's print consistent with Emily's. Monica felt the muscles in her jaw tighten. It was not enough for a conviction, but it was proof she had been in that house, or at least that her belongings had ended up there. She thanked the technician and ended the call, staring at the ground for a moment as she absorbed it. Denise asked what the call was, about her voice flat. Monica explained carefully, refusing to sugarcoat. Denise listened without blinking, her face pale, but set with determination. She asked if that meant the old man had taken Emily, if that meant her daughter had been there. Monica chose her words carefully. It meant Emily's things had been there, that was all they could say for certain. Denise closed her eyes and nodded, pressing her lips together until they turned white. Monica hated that answer, hated having to say it, but she refused to lie. She promised herself she would not give Denise false hope or false certainty. They walked back toward the parking lot in silence, the journal photos tucked safely in Monica's bag. Denise stopped at the bench where she had sat that day. She ran a hand along the worn wood nails, scraping paint that flaked off in dry curls. She told Monica she remembered looking away for just a moment to wave at someone. She remembered the sound of her own voice laughing. She remembered turning back and realizing Emily was gone. She remembered screaming her name over and over until her voice cracked. Monica did not interrupt. She let Denise speak until the words ran out. When the older woman fell silent, Monica simply nodded and said they would keep looking. The department sent a cadaver dog team the next week. Denise stayed home this time, pacing her small living room with her phone clutched in her hand. Monica followed the handlers through the park, watching as the dogs sniffed the undergrowth and old play structures. They circled the cement slab twice before moving on no change in behavior. The handlers reassured her it was not conclusive. Soil, water, and time complicated everything. Monica noted it, but felt frustration coil in her chest. She hated these maybes, these nothings that felt like the world taunting them with Emily's absence. They expanded the search beyond the park, combing nearby alleys, abandoned lots, old sheds. Officers knocked on doors of homeowners who had lived there for decades. Some remembered the case vividly, their eyes growing damp as they spoke of the search, the helicopters, the crying mother on the news. Others seemed irritated at the intrusion, rolling their eyes at old ghosts they claimed had nothing to do with them. Monica stayed patient, recording everything, following every lead, no matter how small. She carried the journal photos in her pocket, the words in Emily's childish scrawl pushing her forward even when fatigue made her bones ache. Denise stayed involved. Despite Monica's suggestions, she rest. She wanted to see every search warrant, every site plan, every interview transcript. She demanded updates twice a day. Monica understood. It was the first time in nearly 2 decades anyone had treated Emily's case like it mattered. Denise refused to let them stop. She refused to let Emily disappear again, this time into a folder marked closed. Even when she was exhausted and raw, when she broke down crying in the middle of a conversation, she wiped her eyes and told Monica to keep going. Monica respected that more than she could say. Monica sat at her desk late into the night, the glow of her computer screen illuminating tired eyes. She read interview transcripts for the 3rd time, focusing on neighbors who had lived near the park in 2003. Names, blurred stories repeated, but one statement caught her eye again. It was brief, almost dismissive, a line buried in the middle of a page. Harold Beck said he did not see anything unusual that day. Monica frowned at the wording. She remembered his address had been only 2 houses from the park entrance. He had sold the home less than 6 months after Emily disappeared. She wrote his name in bold on her notepad. She had missed it before the way everyone had. She would not miss it now. The next morning, Monica tracked Harold to a nursing home on the edge of town. The building smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee, the halls lined with faded art and cheerful posters about wellness. Monica signed in at the front desk, introducing herself with professional calm. An aide led her to a small shared room where Harold sat in a worn recliner blanket tucked around thin legs. His eyes were watery but sharp as they fixed on her badge. He waited for her to speak, wary his mouth a hard line. Monica explained why she was there, choosing her words carefully. She told him they were reopening Emily Harris's case. Harold shifted in his chair, his fingers picking at the blanket. He claimed he remembered the case, said it was a terrible thing, but that he did not know anything. Monica let the silence stretch. She watched the twitch in his jaw the way he refused to meet her eyes. She asked again about that day, describing the park, the time of afternoon, the people gathering after the disappearance. Harold's fingers stilled. He looked past her, voice low, cracking as he said he had seen a man walking with a little girl. Monica leaned in, voice steady, asking for details he had never given before. He hesitated, then said he had seen them near the edge of the woods, the man holding Emily's wrist firmly as if to guide her. Monica asked why he had never told anyone. Harold's face crumpled. He admitted he had been scared. He had a prior DUI, was on probation at the time, worried the police would suspect him or make trouble. He wiped his eyes with the back of his liver-spotted hand. He said he tried to forget. He told himself maybe it was nothing, maybe it was her father or uncle. But he had known it was not. He remembered Emily looking back over her shoulder at him, eyes wide, mouth opening like she wanted to say something. Monica's pen moved carefully across her pad. She asked what the man looked like. Harold said he was local, someone he recognized. He said he could not remember the name, but he remembered the face. Monica showed him old photos, people who had lived in the neighborhood at the time. Harold squinted, shaking his head at most. But when she turned over one picture, he froze. His fingers hovered above it. He said that was him. He did not speak the name. Monica read it aloud. Scott Jensen. Harold swallowed hard. He said yes. He was sure. He said Scott had lived 2 streets over, used to volunteer for the search parties. Monica's pulse thudded in her ears. She thanked Harold, voice calm despite her racing thoughts. She promised to follow up. She stood, leaving him sitting there, trembling, tears sliding down his cheeks into the worn fabric of the blanket. Monica left the nursing home and drove straight to the station, fingers drumming on the steering wheel at every red light. She pulled Jensen's file thin and unimpressive. No criminal record, a couple of unpaid parking tickets. He had been interviewed once briefly 2 days after Emily vanished. He had been volunteering at the park, handing out flyers. His statement was short, vague. Said he had not seen anything, did not know the family well. Monica cursed under her breath, realizing no one had pushed him for details. He had moved away 6 months later, same as Harold, only farther. Out of state. She checked property records, mortgage transfers, everything she could find until the address glared at her from the screen. She called Denise before making the trip. Denise answered on the first ring, voice tight. Monica explained she was following a new lead, that she would be gone for a few days. Denise demanded to come. Monica hesitated, but Denise insisted. Monica understood. They drove in silence most of the way, the hum of the car filling the spaces where words failed them. Denise stared out the window, face at hands clenched in her lap. When they stopped for gas, Monica caught her crying in the bathroom, but neither of them mentioned it when they got back in the car. The drive felt endless, each mile heavy with questions neither of them wanted to ask aloud. They arrived at the address listed on Jensen's last known records. It was a small single-story house with peeling paint-overgrown grass and children's toys scattered in the yard, though none of them looked recently used. Monica checked her service weapon, her badge breathing carefully. She knocked hard enough to rattle the old door. After a pause, it opened a crack. A woman's face appeared wary. Monica introduced herself, asking for Scott Jensen. The woman's eyes flickered. She called over her shoulder. A man appeared behind her, older than his picture, heavier hair, grayer, but unmistakable. His expression flattened when he saw the badge. Monica asked if they could talk. He tried to shut the door. She put her foot in the gap. Scott's voice was low and defensive as Monica questioned him. He denied knowing Emily beyond seeing her at the park. He claimed everyone was handing out flyers that he barely spoke to the family. Denise stood behind Monica, shaking with rage, voice cracking as she demanded he look at her. He refused. His eyes stayed on the floor. Monica pressed harder, bringing up Harold's identification, the timing of his move, the new concrete patio he poured behind his old house a month after Emily vanished. Scott's face changed at that. He stammered, said it was for landscaping, nothing more. Monica watched his pupils widen, sweat bead on his forehead. Denise let out a broken sound that was neither a sob nor a word. Monica did not arrest him. She did not have enough. But she left with his answers recorded, his reactions documented. She filed for warrants that same afternoon, preparing to tear apart every record of his life. She drove Denise to a motel and paid for the room herself, sitting with her on the bed as Denise rocked back and forth, hands over her mouth. Monica promised she would not stop. Denise nodded numbly. Eyes red, voice gone. They stayed like that for an hour before Monica left to make calls, her phone heavy in her palm, as she scrolled through contacts determined to find the next crack in his story. Monica returned to the precinct with a determination that bordered on obsession. She dropped her bag by her desk and began pinning photographs to the corkboard in the small conference room she had claimed for the investigation. Emily's picture sat at the center, her gap-toothed smile a bright and painful reminder of why they were there. Around it, Monica arranged old neighborhood maps, property records, photos of Scott Jensen at community events, and the timeline of his movements before and after Emily's disappearance. She marked dates and red connections in blue, building a visual case for herself and any officer she could convince to help. She ordered a full background check on Scott Jensen, not the half-hearted one that had been done years before. She found out he had volunteered at the original search parties nearly every day in the first week, offering coffee to other volunteers, walking grids with them, even hugging Denise once on camera. Monica watched the footage frame by frame in the archive room, teeth grinding. She saw the casual arm around Denise's shoulders as she wept, saw the practiced sorrow in his eyes. She paused the video there, letting her anger focus her resolve. She printed the frame and added it to the board, a new piece of evidence in plain sight. She pulled property records and found that Scott had poured a new concrete patio behind his old house a month after Emily vanished. The permit was hastily filed and poorly documented the contractor, a friend who had since died. Monica tracked down old photos of the yard before and after, noting the differences in the landscaping. She requested ground-penetrating radar for the new owners, explaining the history with careful, grim honesty. The family agreed reluctantly, fear in their eyes as they signed the paperwork. Officers arrived with equipment, methodically scanning every inch of the slab as the new homeowners watched from the porch. While waiting for those results, Monica and her team began re-interviewing old witnesses. Some had moved, some had died, but many were still in town. She sat at kitchen tables and plastic chairs in small apartments, notebooks balanced on her knee. She asked the same questions that had been asked 20 years earlier, but this time she listened harder. She caught hesitations, conflicting memories, offhand mentions of Scott Jensen being friendly with children at the park. One woman remembered him handing out candy from his pockets during the search, saying it was for the volunteers' kids to keep them calm. Monica wrote it all down carefully, word by word, her pen pressing grooves into the paper. She returned to the nursing home and sat with Harold Beck again, patient despite his shame. She pushed for details he had tried to forget. He described the way Emily's arm was pulled tight in the man's grip, the fear on her face. Monica handed him more photos, older and newer ones of Scott. Harold trembled as he pointed again and again to the same face. His voice cracked when he apologized for not telling sooner. Monica reached across the small table and put her hand over his, not as a detective, but as someone who understood regret. She promised him it was not too late to help. Back at the station, Monica ordered a search warrant for Scott Jensen's old property, the contractor's records, and his personal belongings. She included Harold's sworn statement, the property timeline, the hair clip with Emily's partial print, and the journal entries. The judge read it all in silence before signing. Monica exhaled in relief as she took the signed warrant in hand. She called her team together in the briefing room, their faces reflecting exhaustion but also grim readiness. She explained the plan step by step, assigning roles with clinical precision. No one joked, no one smiled. They all understood the weight of what they were about to do. Denise stayed in town during the raid, pacing her small living room with the TV off her phone, never leaving her hand. She called Monica twice that morning, voice shaking as she asked what they were doing next. Monica told her the truth every time. Denise listened, her breathing ragged, and told Monica she wanted to see the place once they were done. Monica promised nothing but wrote it down anyway. When Denise hung up, she sank onto her couch and wrapped her arms around her stomach, rocking slightly as if trying to comfort a child who was no longer there. Officers gathered at Scott Jensen's old property at dawn. Trucks lined up quietly along the curb lights, flashing red and blue in the cold gray morning. Monica watched as specialists unpacked drills, hammers ground penetrating radar results showing anomalies under the concrete. Neighbors emerged onto porches in robes, watching in silence. The new owners stood on the lawn, arms wrapped around each other. Monica gave the nod and they began breaking apart the patio in careful measured chunks, the jackhammers roaring to life and drowning out any conversation. She stood back, arms crossed, jaw set as dust billowed around the workers. The first layer of concrete cracked and fell away, revealing soil disturbed but tamped down long ago. Officers dug with shovels, removing dirt in measured scoops, eyes alert for any change in texture or color. Monica watched every shovelful, heart hammering painfully. She remembered every photo of Emily she had ever seen, every line of that journal written in careful, childish script. The digging continued for hours under the harsh winter sun until finally an officer paused, holding up a small object wrapped in crumbling fabric. The digging stopped. Monica moved in slowly, squatting to see better. She knew even before it was fully uncovered what it was. She called for evidence markers, photographs, the forensic team. She refused to turn away as they unearthed the rest of the bundle, revealing a small, decayed backpack and the fragile remnants of clothes that matched Emily's description. Monica stood slowly, her knees cracking. She turned to her team and gave instructions in a voice she barely recognized as her own. Secure the scene. Contact the medical examiner. Notify the family liaison. Her hand shook only once, and she forced it to still. She refused to let herself cry, not yet. She owed Denise her composure, owed Emily this final act of respect. Monica finally stepped away from the pit, removing her gloves, carefully breathing in the cold air like it was the first breath she had taken all day. She called Denise's number, pressing the phone to her ear with a steady hand. When Denise answered, there was no greeting, only a broken question. Monica closed her eyes briefly before telling her they had found something. Denise let out a sound that was half sob and half wail. Monica listened in silence, letting her speak, letting her cry. When Denise could talk again, Monica told her she would pick her up if she wanted to see it herself. Denise did not answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was raw. She said yes. Denise sat in the back seat of Monica's unmarked car, her hands twisting in her lap until the knuckles turned white. She kept her eyes fixed on the road ahead, but did not really see it, the world passing in a blur of muted colors and indistinct shapes. Her breathing was ragged, uneven, the weight in her chest so heavy she felt like she might collapse inward. Monica drove in silence, her own face set in grim concentration. She occasionally glanced at Denise in the rearview mirror, her expression unreadable but not unkind. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the quiet suburban streets they navigated slowly. When they arrived at the site, Denise sat frozen for a moment before she forced herself to move. She pushed open the door with shaking hands and stepped onto the uneven ground, her shoes sinking slightly into the disturbed soil. The crime scene tape flapped gently in the breeze. its bright color stark against the muted winter landscape. Officers moved carefully within the perimeter, collecting evidence with practiced efficiency. Denise could see the hole in the ground where they had found the small bundle, the dirt piled beside it like an open wound. She pressed her lips together so tightly they nearly bled. Monica stood beside her without touching her, knowing Denise would not want that. Instead, she spoke in a low, even voice, explaining every detail. The forensic team had confirmed the presence of clothing fibers matching Emily's last known outfit. The backpack had been partially preserved in the soil enough for positive identification. They would still run DNA tests on everything, but Monica told Denise gently that there was no real doubt about what they had found. Denise listened without blinking, her eyes glassy and distant. She felt like she was watching someone else live this moment, someone she pitied but could not help. As the sun continued its slow descent, the scene took on a kind of grim solemnity. Officers spoke quietly, their usual banter silenced out of respect. The medical examiner arrived and knelt at the edge of the grave, his movements careful and deliberate. Denise watched every action with the intensity of someone who could not look away. She felt her knees threaten to buckle, but forced herself to stand straight, refusing to show weakness in front of the place where her daughter had spent her final moments. Her fingers trembled so violently she pressed them against her sides to still them, nails biting into the fabric of her coat. Monica spoke again, her voice measured. She explained that they would take everything back to the lab, that they would examine every fiber, every scrap of evidence. She promised they would find the truth of what happened, even if it took months of careful work. Denise nodded stiffly, the words washing over her like cold water. She did not answer immediately, her throat too tight. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked, but held steady. She said she wanted to be there when they laid Emily to rest properly. Monica nodded without hesitation and said she would make sure of it. They drove back to the station in near silence. The radio turned off, the only sound the hum of the tires on the cracked asphalt. Denise leaned her head against the cool glass of the window, eyes closed but not asleep. She saw Emily in her mind as vividly as if she sat beside her. She saw the little girl in her yellow shirt, her hair in crooked pigtails, laughing with the unrestrained joy of someone who believed the world was safe. Denise's chest ached at the memory, tears slipping down her cheeks without resistance. She did not wipe them away. She let them fall. At the station, Monica filled out the necessary paperwork with clinical efficiency, her pen scratching across forms as she checked boxes and signed her name. She spoke to other officers in low tones, making sure the evidence was properly logged and secured. Denise sat in the corner feeling oddly numb. She watched the police station operate around her, a machine designed to solve human tragedies with procedure and protocol. She felt both grateful and resentful needing them, but hating that she needed them at all. She wanted to scream, but found she no longer had the strength. The next morning, Monica visited Denise at home. She knocked softly before letting herself in, finding Denise sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee she had not touched. The old missing posters were spread out in front of her, their corners frayed and stained from years of handling. Monica sat down across from her without asking, resting her badge on the table between them as a quiet sign of solidarity. She told Denise they would be making an official statement later that day. Denise nodded, her gaze fixed on Emily's photograph. She traced the outline of her daughter's face with a finger, eyes wet but unblinking. The press conference was subdued. The reporters hushed in anticipation as Monica stepped to the podium. She spoke clearly, outlining the timeline of the investigation. The evidence recovered, the warrant executed, and the discovery made at the Jensen property. She avoided speculation, but made clear that charges would be filed as soon as the forensic work was completed. Denise stood to the side, surrounded by officers who formed a quiet protective circle around her. She did not speak. She did not need to. Her presence was enough the embodiment of a truth that no longer needed explanation. Afterward, Denise returned home to a house that felt both emptier and somehow less haunted. She closed Emily's bedroom door, gently pressing her forehead to the wood and whispering words meant only for her daughter. She told her she was sorry over and over, voice breaking with each repetition. She promised Emily she would give her the rest she deserved. She spent the next few days making arrangements with a funeral home that had offered its services without charge, their staff quietly compassionate in a way she had not expected. She chose a small white casket, the sight of it nearly undoing her, but she forced herself to finish. The funeral was held on a bright, cold morning, the winter sun doing little to warm the assembled mourners. Denise stood at the front, clutching the stuffed bunny that had once belonged to Emily, the fabric worn soft from years of being held in desperate hands. Monica attended in her dress blues, standing at respectful attention a few rows back. Neighbors came too, some weeping openly, others holding each other in solemn silence. Denise felt their eyes on her but focused only on the small casket at the front, the final resting place of the little girl who had once been her entire world. When the service ended, Denise stayed behind as the crowd slowly drifted away. She knelt in the frost-crusted grass beside the grave, resting the bunny gently atop the casket before it was lowered. She closed her eyes and spoke in a voice made raw from grief, but also something like peace. She told Emily she was safe now that no one would hurt her again. She promised she would keep her memory alive in the only way she knew how, by refusing to let her be forgotten. She sat there until the funeral director finally approached and spoke quietly, helping her to her feet. Monica walked her back to the car, steadying her with a firm but gentle grip on her elbow. They did not speak on the ride home, both women lost in their own thoughts. Monica considered the next steps in the case, the warrants, the charges, the trial that would almost certainly follow. Denise considered what it meant to live in a world where her daughter was gone, but finally found. She would never again have to wonder where Emily was or what had happened to her. It was a small mercy, but it was a mercy all the same. That night, Denise sat in her quiet living room, the flickering lamplight casting long shadows on the walls. She sipped her tea slowly, her fingers no longer shaking quite so badly. She picked up Emily's journal now, returned to her, and read the pages once more. The words still hurt, but they felt like a connection rather than a curse. She closed the book gently and rested it on the table. She let her head fall back against the chair, eyes closed, breathing slowly. She understood she would never be whole again, but she also understood that healing did not mean forgetting. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more content and make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. We would love to hear what you think about the plot and where you are watching from, so share your thoughts in the comments below. Your feedback helps us create even more compelling stories for you.